All right, everybody, welcome back to the Resident Stay podcast. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by Mr. Sam Kelly. Sam Kelly is the author of a new book, Human History on Drugs. And I'm going to go ahead and read Sam's bio that he sent to me. Sam Kelly is the author of Human History on Drugs. Sam is on the autism spectrum. When he's interested in something, he really digs into it. He spends hours every day looking stuff up, going on tangents, and uncovering every last stubborn detail. He studied history at Stanford University, then determined to share his love of little-known historical facts, bizarre little-known historical facts with others. He started a TikTok where he tells true stories of famous historical figures who used drugs and how it impacted their lives. All right, Sam, so it sounds like a really fascinating topic, and this is our third iteration of the show that we've started, and now we're actually, it appears we're actually working. So, but you did mention, I'll just summarize. You mentioned that you had a TikTok and you were able to get a book contract through the TikTok, and sounds like it's taken off. So that's great. And so I wanted you just to go ahead and let's just start out by what brought your interest into this particular topic.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've always loved history from when I was just a little kid. When I was in elementary school, I'd asked to borrow the teacher's edition of the textbook because I wanted to read the extra stuff they put in the margins and the discussion questions and all the stuff that was beyond the regular curriculum. And my mom would come in the next morning and find me passed out with a book still open on my chest. So I've always loved going beyond the boundaries of what's conventionally taught in the classroom to look at other stuff. And I've always wanted to know more. And I thought that it was so fascinating how when I dug just a little bit, I found all these incredibly fascinating stories about drug use by major historical figures that it seemed like this would be something that people would love to talk about, and yet these were barely known facts that people responded with surprise whenever I mentioned them. And I thought that this was such a underappreciated but rich vein of fascinating material that I just had to dig deep and share it with people.
Great. So what did you? I don't know if you want to just start out with some of your overall distillation of what you learned, or start out with some particularly interesting historical figures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the overall, the sense I got overall, and to be fair, this was already a belief that I had before I did the research, but the research really sort of backed up this view, is that drugs are not inherently good or bad, but they're tools that can be used in different ways. And some tools have more uses than others. Some are safer than others, but there is no inherent moral element to drug use, and drugs aren't inherently like, we can't say that as a category they're good or bad, because it's fundamentally about being informed about their use and how they work. The comparison I like to make is that a butter knife is a tool and a chainsaw is a tool, but it's a lot easier to mess someone up with the chainsaw, even though they both have legitimate purposes.
Okay. Now, I would maybe, let's say disagree, but I mean, so you could look at, I was thinking about this the other day, even before, we had the show, but like someone like Charlie Parker, who was an exceptional saxophone player, but a big part of his life was his heroin addiction. And then what killed him was quitting heroin and just drinking a lot of alcohol. Now, if you see, you look at, say, Raymond Chandler, right? The great detective author who, F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? Dylan Thomas, the poet. These are people that now maybe at some point did alcohol benefit them? I don't know, but it certainly ended up destroying them. So that's, and so, that's where I would say is that, is this as a person using the drugs or being used by the drugs? So I don't know if you make that distinction, because I think that some things are.
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely do try and make that distinction because yeah, obviously that's an example I would say where it ends up taking over their lives. Certainly several of the big names that I have in the book brought to ruin by drugs. I mean, Alexander the Great never lost a single battle in his life, but he was killed by, in large part, due to his overconsumption of, he effectively overdosed on alcohol and opium. And so certainly someone who no human being could defeat in battle ends up defeating himself himself through the weight of his own addictions. So I'm definitely not trying to deny that a lot of people come to a bad end from these things. But at the same time, like, lots of people do drink alcohol not to excess and do it responsibly. And so that is very much a case of, it is definitely like, sure, in excess, alcohol is terrible for you, and can be very, very destructive, but it is not an inherently evil substance. And it's not the case that if you consume any alcohol, you'll end up like the worst case scenario. So I try and cover a very broad spectrum of different outcomes for people in this book. Some people, they have drug use experiences, and some drugs are more likely to, I mean, say like people who use cannabis don't nearly have the same negative effects, say, as people who get hooked on meth, for instance. So, you know, there's obviously differences in variation of these things, but some people have more benign drug experiences, and some people have ones that absolutely destroy their lives and cause them incredible suffering and an early death. So it really is a big range.
Great. Okay. Well, so yeah, go ahead and just dive into your material, whatever you think is relevant or stories that are interesting. And
Yeah.
I'm listening. So
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most fascinating ones, the one that kind of sort of got me into the idea of writing this book was, like many people, I took Intro to Psych in college, and so I had we learned obviously about Sigmund Freud and how his theory of the subconscious mind was incredibly important and foundational for a lot of future psychoanalytical work. Yet at the same time, a lot of his ideas, like, you know, penis envy and the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex, a lot of these things are now seen as extremely bizarre and discredited. And so in class, we learned that, yeah, some of his insights are very valuable still, and others are now rejected by modern medicine. And I thought, like, he's got such a zeal and such a belief in promoting all of these things during his life. Where does that come from? What else has he written? And so I look into his bibliography, and one of the other works he's written is something called Uber Coca. And I think, coca? Like coca leaves, like the stuff they make cocaine out of. And so I read that, and it turns out Sigmund Freud writes what is basically an exultant ode. Like, it is basically a pamphlet, but like an essay extolling how great he thinks cocaine is and how he thinks it's a wonder drug. He claims that it's not addictive, which is obviously it is, but he claims that it's not, and is just generally over the moon about it. And so I dig a little deeper, and it turns out for 12 years, when he's the most productive in his career and doing the most of his stuff, he is doing cocaine almost every single day, like all day. The reason why he thought it wasn't addictive is that he never ran out of it, because at the time it was just a curiosity in Europe. It had recently been synthesized in powder form, and so it was still just a thing that medical researchers were looking into. And a lot of the cocaine he simply wrote to pharmaceutical companies and said, "Hi, I'm a respected member of the Viennese medical community. Can I please have a sample of your product?" And so for about a dozen years, he was just set up with largely free, endless supplies of medical grade cocaine. And all of a sudden, knowing that he was doing that when doing a lot of his writing and psychoanalysis, it makes much more sense why he had such a confident belief in penis envy and the Oedipus complex, because he was coked out the entire time.
yeah, no, that's it's an interesting story. And of course, I'm very familiar with Freud's, cocaine. Really, his books, his magnum opuses are absolutely cocaine fueled.
Oh, yeah.
Think of like, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, or like, Hunter S. Thompson. These are drug fueled books. Cocaine. I mean, Freud, and he also prescribed cocaine to most of his patients.
Oh, yeah.
But he had really, he had the best liquid dental, like the highest quality that people probably only Pablo Escobar can get these anymore.
Oh, no, yeah, extremely pure, like, again, medical grade, so like almost as high a pure, as basically a pure substance. So not cut with anything, and he's getting this often as free samples.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that does explain. He has had, of course, a tremendous impact, and
Oh, yeah.
but it does. I think that in a certain way, I think one thing you could say is you really can't understand Freud's major works without understanding that he was on coke, but there's a lot of artists, so that's a type of inspiration. Now, I don't know if his cocaine use ever end up causing him any problems, or he was okay with it his whole life.
Well, I mean, it definitely. So on more than one occasion, he had to have a surgeon use a heated scalpel to reopen his like swollen. His nasal cavities had basically been shut, and he had to have them cut open with a heated scalpel by a surgeon on more than one occasion, so that he could continue doing cocaine by that. But I guess he considered that to be an acceptable trade-off, probably because he was doing tons of cocaine. I mean, again, obviously, a lot of people do a lot of cocaine and do not create foundational texts that help revolutionize the field. So certainly, I'm not trying to, in no way am I trying to downplay the fact that Freud actually made tremendous contributions, but also that he had some seriously bizarre ideas, and understanding the motivations for the fact that he had both. And again, like when he prescribed cocaine to his patients, it often went terribly. Like, for instance, a friend of his believed that since he believed that cocaine wasn't addictive, a friend of his was hooked on morphine. And so he decided to try and treat the morphine addiction by giving the friend cocaine instead of morphine, and then suddenly discontinuing the cocaine. And so, of course, when he does that, the friend has a psychotic break and later commit suicide. But he seemed to think that it was just a fluke, you know, like he just had this absolute confidence that it was brilliant. And if it didn't work, maybe he just wasn't dosing it right or something. But he really, like, he loved cocaine.
Yes, he did. More than, who's the great, that guy, a super freak, Rick James. So that's the guy who ended up, down, but, I mean, it's, he's got that, there you go. He's got the confidence and he's riding the wave. And that's one thing though, too, everyone's, neurophysiology, psychology, based, the effects of these things are very individual. So that's a great story. And I just say that actually the unconscious, subconscious is actually Nietzsche. So Freud borrowed that from Nietzsche, took it from philosophy and brought it to psychology. So his credit for that is a little bit spurious.
I mean, certainly in the, like, him bringing it into this, it's like he didn't create the idea out of whole cloth. He got it from sort of an existing tradition and Nietzsche is actually in there too, because Nietzsche was a doctor of philosophy, but again, he was such a respected member of the academic community where he lived that he would just write himself prescriptions for opium and chloral hydrate, and he would go in and they'd be like, Dr. Nietzsche, absolutely. It didn't occur to them to be like, wait, is he actually a medical doctor? Can he prescribe himself drugs? But Nietzsche had a drug problem, which was a very big contribution to his later psychiatric collapse, his institutionalization. And then here's the extra brutal thing is that while he's institutionalized, his sister gets like legal control over him, like power of attorney or whatever. And Nietzsche was not an anti-Semite or a nationalist. He was someone who had cut ties with people for being anti-Jewish prejudice, for having anti-Jewish prejudice, and he had renounced his own Prussian citizenship. So he was actually technically stateless for a lot of his life. But his sister was extremely anti-Semitic, and she was very nationalistic. And so when she got a hold of his writings, she inserted a bunch of her own beliefs into them and added content that made them, like, that's why Nietzsche was later appreciated by the Nazis, is because his sister heavily edited his work to make it seem like he would agree with them, when in fact, if Nietzsche had retained his sanity, like he would have had lived to that point, he would have been disgusted and horrified by what the Nazis were doing, because that wasn't what he believed at all. But he lost the ability to control his own affairs, in large part due to his addiction to hard drugs.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Sam. I believe that's from a lot of historical sources describe that as being due to syphilis. So,
well, I mean, yes, that was all. There were a lot of contributing factors.
Because he was still until he finally snapped, he was still writing cogently, right? I think the last letter he signed Dionysus and the Crucified One,
Yeah.
That's a bit new to me. So I'm not. I know that some of his writings he criticizes, he calls the alcoholia of the German beer hall culture and that stuff. But tell me a little bit more about Nietzsche's drug use, because I'm not familiar with that.
Again, it's mostly he is mostly taking medicinal concentrations of, again, like I said, he was looking for opium and chloral hydrate. Now, chloral hydrate, closely related to chloroform, it used to be a widespread sleeping pill back in the older days, but they had to stop using it in large part because it caused negative neurological symptoms. It really messed people up, and it could cause like long-term, people would behave in very strange ways. It was just ended up being too heavy to really safely use for people. But it was also very addictive, and so he developed an addiction to that, and he had an addiction to medical opium. Those were things that he did in his, and obviously the syphilis, tertiary syphilis does indeed cause mental breakdown as part of one of its symptoms, and that can happen earlier in the process. So obviously I don't want to downplay the other factors that were, that caused his ultimate break with reality, but definitely the fact that he compulsively used these drugs and just self-medicated with them to soothe his anxieties and his whatever was distressing him. He ended up using them in a very excessive way because, again, those are both very addictive drugs.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, go ahead. Well, if you'd like to bring up some of your other case studies from your book.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite ones that I always love talking about, and very, very closely connected to the fact that cocaine used to be legal and widely used in Europe and even the United States for a time as like a medical curiosity, is the fact that there was a pope. So the current pope is Pope Leo XIV. And so the previous pope with the name Leo was in the late 19th century, Pope Leo XIII. And Pope Leo XIII is still considered a revered church father. He is widely respected and beloved to the point that, again, the current pope chose to be named after him. And everyone thought it was a good idea. But this guy, he loved cocaine wine. He takes the cocaine wine at the time was just a thing you could buy at the grocery store. Just cocaine infused wine. It was like an energy tonic, or like, a wine that gave you some pep in your step. And so this was an Italian brand called Vin Mariani, and it was sold internationally. In addition to this Pope, Thomas Edison drank it. Queen Victoria drank it. Ulysses S. Grant drank it. But this Pope, he really, really loved it. So he took office when he was 75. He was Pope until he died in his 90s. And in the history of the Catholic Church, there's been about 300 encyclicals, these big documents of religious purpose. And this Pope wrote about 80 of them. He had tremendous energy for an old guy. And people asked him about it. And he said that he had his flask. He always carried a flask of the cocaine-infused wine with him. And he said it was, quote, to fortify me when prayer is insufficient. He loved this stuff called Vin Mariani so much that he invited the creator, Mariani, to the Vatican to give him a Vatican gold medal. And then Pope Leo XIII appeared in a full-page ad for the cocaine wine, endorsing it. And that was all seen as totally normal at the time and not at all a scandalous thing. It was just seen as like, yeah, this is one of the best celebrity endorsements we can possibly get. So yeah, that ad is reprinted in my book.
That's a fascinating story. And so, you see also, though, perhaps, like, it sounds like the Pope did pretty good. He was still going till old age, so maybe it was not so bad. That wine actually sounds pretty good.
That's the thing. Yeah, it was
maybe because if a lot of I'm not, I'm completely drug free, but I know that there's a lot of street cocaine and everything. It's always cut with various things, but especially say something like meth. Meth is a completely, cocaine or the cocoa leaf, right, is still something from nature, right? It's a natural thing. But like, meth, I see that is like completely artificial like this. It's very toxic, right? So I don't know. It seems like that's some It'd be like good advertisement for cocaine, right? Not that I'm advertising cocaine, but
No,
it's
no,
interesting,
absolutely, yeah.
to see also, quantity, things like that. So, but again, so that's a fascinating story. I had no idea about the coked up Pope. So that's great.
Yeah, and again, at that time, you could just get that stuff in grocery stores. So it wasn't like today where there's, like the people who are dealing it are murderous cartels who have a strong, they have a strong incentive to cut down the purity as much as possible so they can sell as much as they want. They can get the most value out of the less actual amount of product, or if they do, then it's filled with toxic fillers or God knows what. But at this time, it was a regulated grocery store product. You could just go in and it was like whatever the equivalents of the FDA were, so this was and obviously the Pope was not getting hammered on this stuff he was not drinking heavily to excess, so he was able to keep it under control. And it was the whole milieu around it was much less intense and much more normalized. And so for better or for worse, it was very easy for people to get it. But a lot of people just treated it like an ordinary grocery product and didn't go absolutely crazy with it. So again, I don't think that cocaine should be legal to sell in products nowadays. I don't think that people should just, go back to the days when Coca-Cola, which funnily enough, Coca-Cola actually starts out as a knockoff of that beverage. Yeah. And then an early version of Prohibition in Georgia removes the wine from it. And so they sell the beverage, which still contains tons of caffeine and, of course, cocaine, as a temperance drink. And then, of course, later they have to remove the cocaine, but they still have all these coca leaf alkaloids in Coke to this day. And that's part of the legacy of the cocaine-infused wine and how popular it was in the beverage industry, was that everyone wanted to get a piece of it. And that's where one of our biggest drink companies today comes from, is imitating that kind of success.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And the... in the sort of the popular use pharmacology and stuff like that. I mean, one thing, of course, and I know I would guarantee you're aware of this, but heroin was seen as a safe alternative to morphine.
Oh yeah.
Yep. So that's and so a lot of these drugs, they were readily available, right? Even the romantic poets and stuff. You just, wasn't the illegalization and then sort of the mystique, right, of the countercultural mystique. You find with during the 60s or 50s, whatever. Wasn't necessarily there. So that's a fascinating story. Well, Sam, why don't we go through, you want to go through some other anecdotes? That was quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so speaking of what you were saying about authors being, you can tell in someone's work the influence of a Philip K. Dick is a great example of someone who is hugely influenced.
Substance D. I mean, yeah, that's it. Substance D. I mean, he would write. I mean, there's a period of time when he actually had his wife in the house, whatever, before he got divorced. He would just write novels per week, just this insane work schedule. He just go.
Oh yeah. I forget what the exact quote was, but he was saying that if he did enough amphetamine, he would just do a ton of amphetamine pills. I think Benzedrine was the brand name at the time. And for a lot of his life, you could still buy Benzedrine over the counter, which is sort of like if it was possible to buy Adderall over the counter now, because the ingredients are extremely similar. And he just had, I mean, those bowls they have at Halloween that they fill with candy? He had a bowl like that full of amphetamines, and he would just reach into it whenever he felt like it and scoop a little handful out and pop them in. And so he could write dozens of pages per day and crank out tons of science. And so it's he had a bunch of nerves and anxiety. So he drops out of college and he's like, now I've got to find a way to support myself. myself, and I guess I'm going to write science fiction because I love that. But science fiction doesn't pay a lot. So in order to get any decent salary, I've got to write a lot of science fiction. And so, of course, he ends up doing a bunch of amphetamines because he finds that it enables him to write a lot. But he's already anxious and paranoid. So it just makes him more and more anxious and paranoid, and he gets more and more into it. And you look at his writing, and yeah, the substance D, most of like most of the material, like A Scanner Darkly, is based on like just his autobiographical. They've got the whole premise of all of his like We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, or AKA Total Recall, or we've got The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, AKA Blade Runner. So much of this, you can see the influence of amphetamine psychosis behind the basic points, as in like, what if I'm a robot, but I don't know that I'm a robot because someone's messed with my memories and someone controlled me and my memories are fake, and just that sense of like creeping, crawling dread, and the sense that something about reality is fundamentally not right. You can definitely see how that influences his writing. And so he writes a lot, and a lot of his writing is very iconic, but he also has 5 failed marriages and extreme psychological problems, and he ends up getting horrible pancreatic damage and dying prematurely because of how bad his amphetamine abuse was.
Yeah, well, he also had multiple suicide attempts.
Oh yeah, no, I was just sort of like lightly skimming the surface of his personal problems. Yeah.
The thing is though that he did, he's either, however, he stepped into the future or predicted or just, followed the threads. There's a lot of things, you can see that have actually become part of the mainstream society. But his level of, was one of his, I've read all of his work. Lies Incorporated, one of his last books, it got bad reviews. That is a fascinating book, but on such a level of this, this paranoia and the whole, or the 3 stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. I mean, this is a very, very, very dark book, right? This is like, I mean, if you even follow the premise to the point of where that even makes sense to you as a possibility, you've gone into it's pretty deep paranoid stuff, but also quite insightful.
No, I don't want to make it seem like he was undoubtedly a brilliant author. Again, most people who do massive amounts of amphetamines don't produce an entire oeuvre of like repeated literary genius, so it's absolute, I don't want to downplay his talents or his ability to write brilliant sci-fi, but it's very clearly it's entwined with that tremendous mental instability that comes from doing huge amounts of amphetamines. And so you can see both why his themes resonate to so many people on a broader society, and why he does seem in many aspects pretty prescient, and almost in some ways predicting the future. Whereas in other ways, you can tell that you can almost feel the mental illness radiating out of the writing. He seems distressed,
Yeah, well, that's one thing about Philip K. Dick. I don't. It is that in a certain way. I mean, I don't. It did fuel his writing. I don't know necessarily if it's more the career. I wouldn't say it's necessarily. I mean, where. It provided the field for him to work. It did have background effects, except for, say, Scanner Darkly, which is directly based upon that. It's more like provided the fuel for him to write, but didn't necessarily interfuse his writing. But it probably, invigorated his latent paranoia and stuff. But what do you think about his spiritual awakening? You've got Valis, and then his, with the pink, well, people that. Okay, maybe I'll give more detail for people who may not be familiar. So the young girl who's buying hashish from, and then she has this fish.
She has
fish,
one of those Jesus fist necklaces.
And then the pink light, which is the light.
He believes that an enlightening pink laser is being beamed out of that and into his brain. Some pretty wild stuff there. I mean,
Well, he wrote. I have a copy of this book, The Exegesis of Philip K. Dick.
Yeah.
Huge tome, and I have not, this is just what he wrote basically on the side, which is like, and it's a massive tome, covers all different things.
Thousands of pages, yeah.
Thousands of pages, but in this tome, he's basically doing self-examination in other, ancillary studies within just from that experience of the pink light. Correct? I mean, and this is not even supposed to be published. And it's like, and this is more than most people would write in 5 lifetimes. And that's so I don't know, what do you think about that? I have not managed to get through it. To me, it's a bit too self-involved. I mean, I think that while it's valuable to have reflection and self-examination, this can also go a bit too far, especially if you have tendencies for paranoia and psychosis.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, it has the air of being like it's like he was writing down his obsession, his racing thought, like so much, and so there's just so much in there, and like, you can definitely see that he's trying to do the work, but at the same time, you can also see that I guess some of his conclusions don't really match up with what I guess we would call consensus reality. So it's like there's both. Again, you can both see that there's a brilliant mind there, but it's a mind that has consumed a lot of drugs and might not be entirely in touch with like fully in touch with the real world anymore, but someone who is still very interested in trying to understand themselves however they can.
Yeah, well, primarily it's a he's coming from a sort of a reinstallation of Gnosticism, where you have, he talks about the black iron prison, this thing, and then so basically you have the good creator and you have the evil creator, and it's that kind of binary dualism you find in Manichaeism, etc., Zoroastrianism. But for him, it's okay. You know what? But it's fascinating, but again, some of these, I mean, it's not particularly helpful if you start to see the world around you, like, Palmer Eldritch is pulling apart the atoms and changing space and time. That is not a pleasant way to live, and unfortunately. But he was a great writer, so that's
absolutely, yeah.
So that's fascinating. So let's go ahead and give me another case study. These are very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess another good one would be. I mean, like a pretty sad one, but Judy Garland, just like how she was victimized by the studio system, and so they would just, she was recruited as like a child actor. She signs a contract when she's a little kid. She's got these stage parents who just really want her to be in the industry, and so. I mean, obviously there's messed up stuff going on, in Hollywood and the entertainment industry now, but back then there were much fewer protections. And so they would feed this girl a diet of, they would feed her amphetamines to keep her awake and maybe work up to 72 hours. And then they gave her barbiturates in order to keep her asleep. And just they would constantly be giving her drugs to control every part of her living. Instead of just letting her have an ordinary work schedule, they'd insist that she was fat and make her only have like soup and cigarettes. And so she grows up being accustomed to being basically drugged by adults so that she will be more compliant to them. And as an adult, has tremendous difficulties in functioning without constantly being really high. Are you there? There you are.
Yeah, I had a little technical difficulty. My light went out. So so we have the innocent child actress and just is completely being, drugged up, continuously. So
Yeah, no, they really they treated her as like an asset to extract value from, and not like a human being with feelings. So she was very much sort of like chewed up by the studio system, and as an adult, she ends up like suffering so much from, even though she knows that it often results in destructive stuff for her, she just keeps being drawn back to drug use and to controlling men, because this is the system that she gets used to when she is growing up, because of the studio system that constantly has people telling her what to do and feeding her drugs.
wow. And so in this case, would this be someone that, I mean, her she was able to do what she could do with or without drugs, but it's primarily just to get her. They're maximizing maximum output from their asset.
Yeah, I would argue that this is one of the most clear-cut case in which the drug use was just totally destructive, whereas she was genuinely talented and would have been talented no matter what, but it wasn't the Wizard of Oz was nowhere near enough for them, as they just wanted to shove her in as many pictures as they could, and so they just had her working constantly, and again, it's like she probably could have lived a much better life if they'd simply given her a decent work schedule and didn't condition her as a child to be dependent on drugs for the necessities of survival.
Yeah, they're probably also thinking of that. This is an asset with a limited span, because if you're doing child actor, you have so many years. They're a kid, but so that's a tragic. And how did she end up dying?
She did die young as a consequence of her health was really wrecked by her drug use. So yeah, she did die prematurely as a result of a lifetime of drug abuse. So yeah, that was quite a. That one is very much a bummer, but it's important to show these cases in which drugs are basically foisted upon someone and ruin their lives. Because a lot of people don't really start doing drugs because they don't start doing drugs because they want to do drugs necessarily, but because it becomes very, very normalized for them that they need some kind of substance. And certainly a lot of people got, hooked in the opioid epidemic that way, where they started out using pain pills medically, but were given them without the proper instructions. And those people ended up developing addictions to street drugs and other things, especially once their supply of pharmaceutical medication ran out. And that pattern has been seen in a lot of people. Elvis actually had a very similar story. Elvis was a clean-cut kid but he grew up in a shotgun shack in Mississippi, so he wasn't the most informed about the finer details of medicine. And so he joins the military and is concerned that the people in the military view him as some pretty boy celebrity who's not a serious soldier. And the higher ups tell him, if you want to be a real soldier, take these go pills, these amphetamines. These will make you able to be tougher, need less sleep, be able to. These will help you be all you can be, Elvis. Do you want this or not? And so they give him the amphetamines, and he starts taking these pills there. But he gets used to the idea that, okay, well, these are pharmaceutical. They're from a doctor. So it's not like doing street drugs per se. So he comes back and he's still very much against street drugs. Like if he hears that someone was, oh, you've been smoking reefer, I don't approve of that. Like if his backup dancers, we're smoking pot, he'd say, no, cut that out. Don't ever do that again. But at the same time, he ends up addicted to not just the amphetamines, but especially with how physical his performance style is, he ends up with a lot of hip problems and ends up hooked on opioids as well. And because his manager and his doctor are both more focused on having him keeping him as a paying client, and thus getting him to just perform and make a lot of money. And so they are both just use the medication to keep going on stage and just keep doing it, Elvis. It'll be fine. You're not like them. And so he just becomes convinced that he doesn't have a drug problem, even while he's constantly popping pills. And in fact, he writes a letter to President Richard Nixon when he's not doing as well at this point, and saying, I want to help fight the hippie element. I think they're doing all these recreational drugs and it's a bad thing. And I want to be there to help reach the youth of the nation. And so Nixon's like, I guess this guy's a big celebrity. I'm going to meet with him, but this is pretty weird. And so he ends up meeting with Elvis and giving him this like plastic, like a plastic toy badge, but Elvis is was thrilled about it, in large part because Elvis is completely high on pills while he's there. So the entire time that Elvis is talking about being an anti-drug ambassador with Nixon, he is just really, really high. And there's actually a picture of like a visibly stoned looking Elvis shaking hands with like a confused and uncomfortable looking Richard Nixon right next to each other from that event. And Elvis just did not realize that he had a severe drug addiction, even though it ended up being so bad that, he gets into a very bad way because he's also got addictive problems with comfort eating. So he ends up eating a lot of junk food and doing a lot of drugs. And when he's like 42 years old, he ends up with the opioid pills and such have made him so constipated that he's in the bathroom just trying to use the restroom, and it strains so hard that something like breaks inside him, and he dies.
He actually got a brain aneurysm.
Yeah, exactly. He had a brain aneurysm from the sheer force of just trying to make himself go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I've certainly known about that. Well, that's, and that is, kind of a common story. I mean, hopefully I won't get in trouble for this, but I mean, my brother-in-law, who's now passed away, this guy named Zubin Garg was like, massive artist. This is in India, Northeast India, but, he had the second or third largest funeral in the world for any private individual, like next to, huge, millions and millions of people, almost brought the government down. But I spent time with him, and he was his management. They were making him do show after show after show. They were feeding, getting him drunk all the time, not giving him food, giving him other types of drugs. And he also got into that lifestyle, but that's an example of where, you just keep, you want to extract, the performance, and you just keep feeding these people stuff. And the thing is, though, especially when someone is in a status of celebrity, right?
Yeah.
It's very hard to self-reflect and say, wait, maybe these people aren't the best things. Maybe, I should stop taking drugs. But then, that's what I think Art Blakey of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, I think, if I'm wrong, yeah, maybe, but I'm pretty sure. I remember reading Art Blakey was a heroin user his whole life, but he did it in a moderate, he didn't go over the top, whatever. And it was part of that jazz scene. And he said Charlie Parker, if he had just cut back on his use of dope and not drank, he would still be alive. Because what actually killed Charlie Parker was, as I mentioned in the beginning, he stopped doing heroin and just started just drinking massive amounts of alcohol and just died, a miserable death. So not condoning that, but to someone like Elvis, right? I mean, you reach a point, you've incapacitated the body.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's easy for someone to get surrounded by enablers and yes men when they're successful and they've got like an artistic talent like that. And certainly there's the pressure to keep performing and to keep up appearances and not have visibly decline. So a lot of people will, in an attempt to prevent a visible decline, do things that cause them to visibly decline and perhaps ultimately kill them. But I mean, you see other examples too. In the same way that Elvis, his very physical dancing and performing style ended up with him hooked on painkillers. A very similar thing happened to both Michael Jackson and to Prince. They both have this very highly kinetic performing style where they move their hips. And both of them end up dying from overdoses of medication that they've been taking because they can no longer sleep properly or otherwise just sort of function properly because of the damage that trying to keep up that performance style relentlessly over the amount of damage that it's done to their bodies. They get so used to living that way, it doesn't occur to them there's really any other way to live, and they end up sort of tearing their own bodies apart.
Yeah, it's very, very sad. And that's, the one thing is though too, especially even in the, '60s, right? So you have the management who are feeding some of these artists not only drugs, but also the drug of you're this great artist, right? In fact,
Oh yeah.
yet if you could, I hate to say this, no, Jimi Hendrix I think was a great artist. Say Jim Morrison of the Doors. Well, he's pretty decent. He's not a musical genius. Most of the '60s artists, the moniker of genius, I think, is spread a bit thin. If you look at what music used to be a musician. So, but that being said, like someone like Jim Morrison, he also was encouraged in his hype, and one of his, I think it was one of his managers said he actually believes this stuff. He believes he's a Lizard King. He believes he's a shaman. He's not just doing this for show. He actually has inculcated this into his own mind, as well as, again, when you have the artist is totally high, they don't look at what the contract they're signing, right?
Oh yeah, no, it's very easy for people to buy into their own hype when they're addled like that, just with drug abuse, and it's very easy for people to get into ruinous deals. I think you mentioned Charlie Parker. I think at one point Charlie Parker tried to sign away half his royalties to one of his drug dealers. So yeah, that's a good example of how these things can really distort people's judgment. And yeah, that is a very heady, intoxicating mix of, there's the actual drugs and intoxicants, but then there's the intoxicant of being told you're brilliant and that you're famous because you're the best, and that it makes people think that it creates a false impression of immortality. And of course, at the end of the day, everyone, in fact, is mortal. They are mortal people with mortal livers and mortal kidneys, and they will not be able to, so that kind of rock star lifestyle is not ultimately sustainable. And people who keep it up for a long time will tend to be racked by medical problems later in life.
Except for Keith Richards.
Yeah, and I think they actually studied him because, by all accounts, you should be in way worse shape than you are. They studied Ozzy Osbourne for that too. Like, how are you still alive and not completely fried from all the? It's like, do you have some kind of metabolism that is different? So I think scientists are still studying their DNA, trying to figure out how it was that they didn't get even more like, how was it they were able to stay so normal, relatively speaking?
Yeah, well, and we're glad we got a bit of a late start, so we'll wrap this up. Maybe we can do a part two, just because it's quite interesting.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But you do look at some of which are surprising. I mean, I found the Pope to be quite surprising, and everyone's pretty much familiar with, celebrities. But this is not necessarily drug related. I'm just going to throw this out there. But someone very interesting historical figure was Rasputin, right? Rasputin.
Yes.
So who had he had a schedule of where, so he would I believe it was like 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. he would be in the church doing his prayers. Then 8 to 12 he would meet people. Then 12 to 2 he would go, swimming with the ladies, and he'd do some state duties, and he'd be up all night. He would have orgies every night with, that's one of the reasons he was killed. Like, he was sleeping with all the wives of the, the Russian nobility. He had orgiastic stuff until 4 a.m. and then continue the next day, and basically never slept, and did writing, correspondence, and all this stuff. Or he didn't write, but I mean, it had all this, impact on the state. But I'm wondering if he, even when they killed him, they poisoned him with cyanide. He was shot. He was still going. So I don't know if he took any drugs as well. I find it just, maybe he's one of those anomalous sort of like super, what do you call it? Resilient people.
Well, he drank. He really liked to drink. He drank a lot.
He did drink a lot.
Yeah, which honestly kind of makes it even more surprising that he would be able to but again, the guy just had this weird. he had a lot of weirds. You could kind of see why people thought he might have been like possessed or like otherwise like a supernatural, because he definitely had this almost unearthly energy to him. But he would just had this. He had an extraordinary capacity for alcohol and sexual indulgence. He was really extremely fond of those things. And so it wasn't so much like other drugs. It was just he was a very intense man. Funnily enough, one of the biggest things he did was probably actually not giving someone drugs, because I believe that the Tsar's hemophiliac son, the son who he treats and gets his reputation with the Tsarina as being this miracle healer. I believe that one of his big, and I don't think he was even intentionally doing this, but at the time, aspirin was considered to be a miracle drug that could treat everything. But obviously, because aspirin's a blood thinner, if you give a hemophiliac who already has blood that doesn't clot properly a bunch of aspirin, it will make them even worse. But so not quite knowing that, the doctors of the Tsar were giving his son, they were giving him aspirin in an attempt to treat hemophilia. And so when Rasputin comes in and says, no, don't give him this, I will pray for him instead. Like the praying for him is like a lot of stuff. The Tsar believes that like, and his wife believes that it's because like, oh my God, this is a uniquely holy man. We should listen to this man because he has a connection. But no, it's because he has the doctors stop giving the hemophiliac aspirin, and the kid starts getting better. And so so whatever his prayers do, they become convinced that he's a miracle healer because he simply has them discontinue a harmful drug that the doctors didn't actually realize was harmful.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing story. And he did have literally the guy drank massive amounts of alcohol as well, and it did not sleep. I mean, in all of this schedule, I mean, he would go to this, whatever his villa thing, and he have orgies with who knows how many women. Yeah. And he also had his nude bathing with so he was like almost like the Hindu Krishna, with all the gopis. But the guy, was in church every morning and doing all this stuff. So anyways, that's just, interesting story. So, we're at the, pretty much at the maximum time I have allocated for today. But Sam, it's a really fascinating topic, and I'm sure we just scratched the surface. So why don't you tell the audience where they can find your work and where your book's available?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a pleasure being here. So my book is available at all major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you name it. But if you want to support your local bookstore, you want to check to see if your local indie bookstore or wherever has my book, you can go to the Clearinghouse page at Penguin Random House. That's my publisher, prh.org. They've got a page for human history on drugs that has a list of all the suppliers. So yeah, you can buy my book on Amazon. You can buy it on Barnes & Noble, all the big ones, but you can also buy it at a lot of your small local bookstores as well. So just check that site. And hey, if you don't see it at your local bookstore, but you'd like it to be there, maybe say, hey, do you have this book? I hear it's pretty cool. And so, yeah, I'm on TikTok as Human History on Durgs, like DURGS, because they don't let you say drugs on TikTok, but they let you misspell it and then talk about it there. Whereas on Instagram, I'm Human History on Drugs, because there I think they kind of realized that even if they miss saying drugs won't magically make them appear. It's so yeah, you can find me on TikTok and Instagram, and my book is available wherever books are sold.
Great. Great, Sam. And I'll send you once next couple of days, I'll get this recording edited. Please post it on your channels and whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's been a real pleasure. So, learned a lot, and definitely want to, continue this discussion. The Oedipus complex, and and again, a lot of this stuff probably average person is not aware of it, but just again, revisiting Freud loved cocaine.
So much.
He did he was he was the sine qua non. It was the apex of medical science for and good living, healthy living.
The illustrator for my book, brilliant guy named Paul Gerard, did a bunch of really great. So I've got an illustration in my book of it's like Freud, like Tony Montana and Scarface, just sitting at a table with like a giant pile of cocaine, like, and it's like that's like maybe a slight exaggeration. Maybe he didn't have that much cocaine out at once, but definitely he was like the kind of guy to just do a mountain of cocaine.
Yeah. So, but anyways, all right, Sam. Well, hey, we will connect, and thanks for coming on the show. And
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Send you the recording, and everyone go out, check out Sam's book, and thank you for listening to the podcast, and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely.